For over 2 centuries, two titans of the East battled across mountains, rivers, and frozen steppes, each determined to carve their legacy into the bones of Europe. On one side, the Russian Empire, hungry for warm-water ports and influence. On the other, the mighty but aging Ottoman Empire, desperate to hold on to the last fragments of its once glorious domain. These weren't just border skirmishes. These were full-scale wars that redrew maps, toppled sultans, elevated czars, and dragged in the great powers of Europe. From Crimea to the Balkans, from Orthodox priests to Janissary swords, this is the explosive story of the Russo-Turkish Wars, a clash that shaped the destiny of nations and left scars that still echo in our modern world. You're watching Archive, where history speaks, the sick man of Europe. By the 1700s, the Ottoman Empire, once feared from Vienna to Mecca, was rotting from within. Sultans withdrew into luxury. The military, once elite, had become sluggish and corrupt. What had been a mighty empire now struggled to hold itself together. To the north, Russia was rising. Tsar Peter the Great was dragging his country into the modern world, building ships, reforming the army, and founding the forward-facing city of St. Petersburg. Russia no longer feared the Ottomans. It saw opportunity. The empire didn't realize it yet, but its greatest challenge was no longer in Europe's west. It was coming from the cold, relentless north. A window to the west. Peter the Great wasn't just a ruler. He was a force of nature. Towering over his court at 6'8", he had one obsession: dragging Russia out of medieval isolation and into modern Europe. To do it, he needed access to warm water ports, something the Ottomans controlled. In 1695, Peter launched his first campaign against the Ottoman-held fortress of Azov, near the Black Sea. It was a disaster. His army was ill-prepared, his navy almost non-existent. But Peter learned quickly. He built a fleet from scratch, ships, cannons, docks, and returned the next year. This time, Azov fell. Russia now had a foothold on the Black Sea. It wasn't just a military victory. It was symbolic. The Russian bear had taken its first bite out of Ottoman territory. And Peter wasn't done. This was only the beginning of Russia's long southern push, a push that would transform the balance of power in Eastern Europe forever. While Peter was building fleets in the north, another great power to the west was eyeing Ottoman lands, the Habsburg Empire. For centuries, the Austrians and Ottomans had been locked in a brutal struggle, clashing across the Danube and the Balkans. In 1683, the Ottomans reached the gates of Vienna. But what followed was a turning point. United Christian armies, Austrians, Poles, Germans, pushed the Turks back in a stunning counteroffensive. One by one, the Ottomans lost territory: Hungary, Transylvania, parts of the Balkans. This wasn't just war, it was erosion. Ottoman influence was crumbling in Europe. For the first time, the empire that once terrified kings was now on the defensive. Austria became the dominant force in Central Europe. And the Ottomans? They were bleeding land and prestige. Yet, even wounded, they remained dangerous. An old lion still capable of one last bite. But another predator was circling now. One from the cold north. Russia enters the ring, the Russo-Turkish Wars. Begin the year was 1710. Peter the Great had transformed Russia from a medieval backwater into a rising empire with cannons, fleets, and ambition. But he wanted more: warm water ports, access to the Mediterranean, and recognition as a great power. And to get them, he'd have to go through the Ottomans. When war broke out, Russia marched south, hoping to smash the Ottoman forces and take control of the Black Sea. But Peter underestimated the terrain and the Turks. In the swamps near the Pruth River, Peter's army was surrounded by a massive Ottoman force. For days, the Russians were pinned down, low on supplies, facing annihilation. And then, diplomacy. Peter struck a desperate deal, ceding territory and agreeing to demolish key fortresses. It was a humbling moment. Russia had tasted defeat, but the appetite for Ottoman lands had only grown. From this point on, the Russo-Turkish Wars would erupt again and again, each more brutal, each shifting the balance of power a little more. The Ottomans were no longer facing just Austria. Now, a new and relentless giant had entered the ring. The War of Austrian Succession. Europe turns against itself, 1740 to 1748. The Ottoman Empire watched from the sidelines, at first. In 1740, Europe tore itself apart when the Holy Roman Emperor Charles VI died without a male heir. His daughter, Maria Theresa, was poised to inherit, but the wolves were circling. Prussia, France, Spain, Bavaria, all smelled weakness. War exploded across Europe. Austria fought desperately to keep its empire intact. But while the Christian powers clashed, the Ottomans watched with cold calculation. This was an opportunity. The Ottoman sultans, though not officially part of the war, used the chaos to solidify influence in the Balkans. They armed local allies, stirred rebellion, and eyed the weakening Habsburg borders. When peace came in 1748, the map of Europe had shifted, but the bigger picture was clear. Christian Europe was deeply divided, and the Ottomans, though bruised, were still standing, still scheming, and still watching for their next moment to strike. The Russo-Turkish War, 1768 to 1774. The bear mauls the crescent. The thunder came from the north. By 1768, a new empire had risen with brutal ambition, Russia. Under Catherine the Great, the Russians were hungry for warm water ports, eager to dominate the Black Sea and determined to dismantle Ottoman power. The Ottomans, still clinging to past glory, underestimated their foe. War erupted. Ottoman forces, once feared, were now sluggish, outdated, fractured by internal corruption. The Russian army, modernized and ruthless, tore through Crimea and the Danubian principalities. In 1770, at the Battle of Chesma, the Russian navy obliterated the Ottoman fleet in the Aegean, a humiliating blow that shattered any illusion of Ottoman naval dominance. The Treaty of Küçük-Kaynarca in 1774 was a catastrophe. For the first time, the Ottoman Empire was forced to recognize Russia as the protector of Orthodox Christians within Ottoman lands, a direct threat to sovereignty. Worse, Russia gained access to the Black Sea and secured the right to intervene in Ottoman affairs. The empire once called the shadow of God on earth had just been placed on a Russian leash. The bear had bloodied the crescent, and Europe watched as the old giant swayed. The French campaign in Egypt and Syria, 1798 to 1801. Napoleon strikes the crescent. The year was 1798. While Europe burned in revolution, a new player emerged. One not from the east, but from the stormy heart of France. His name? Napoleon Bonaparte. But this wasn't just a military campaign. This was a message. Napoleon invaded Egypt, not merely to strike at the Ottomans, but to undermine British interests, to reshape the East in his own image, and to carve a new empire from the sands of history. The Ottomans, startled and outraged, allied with Britain and Russia. But Egypt, long neglected by Constantinople, was unprepared. French forces swept through Alexandria, then Cairo, and delivered a crushing blow at the Battle of the Pyramids. Yet the tides turned. At sea, Admiral Nelson's Royal Navy annihilated the French fleet at the Battle of the Nile, stranding Napoleon's army. In Syria, Napoleon pushed north, but at Acre, Ottoman resistance stiffened. Reinforced by the British, the Ottomans halted the advance. Disease and dwindling supplies gnawed at French morale. Napoleon fled back to France in 1799, abandoning his army. By 1801, the remnants surrendered. Though the Ottomans claimed victory, they knew the truth. A European general had marched through their lands with impunity. The French had exposed the rot beneath the surface. The empire survived, but its mask had slipped. Europe had tasted Ottoman vulnerability and would not forget. The Serbian Revolution, 1804 to 1817, the first spark of Balkan fire. It began with blood. In 1704, deep within the Ottoman-controlled Balkans, a quiet fury exploded. The Serbs, long taxed, suppressed, and ruled by corrupt Janissary overlords, rose in rebellion. Their leader, a man as fierce as the mountains he came from, George Petrović, known to history as Karađorđe, Black George. The first Serbian uprising wasn't just a protest, it was a revolution. Armed peasants clashed with seasoned Ottoman troops, torching symbols of imperial rule and seizing local control. For nearly a decade, the Serbs held their ground, forming their own institutions, their own army, even glimpses of a national parliament. For the first time in centuries, a Christian people under Ottoman rule governed themselves. But in 1813, the empire struck back. Ottoman forces returned with vengeance, crushing the rebellion and forcing Karađorđe into exile. Yet the spirit of independence did not die. In 1815, a second fire was lit. This time, it was Miloš Obrenović who led the charge. He was no revolutionary idealist. He was a cunning diplomat and survivor. Rather than seek open war, he negotiated, resisted, and bargained, using rebellion not just to fight, but to win recognition. By 1817, the Ottomans conceded. Serbia would govern itself as an autonomous principality under Ottoman suzerainty. It was a crack in the empire's armor, small but irreversible. The Serbian Revolution wasn't just a local revolt. It was the birth cry of modern nationalism in the Balkans, and it foretold a storm yet to come. The emperor's final gamble. As Napoleon advanced toward Paris, Europe was in a state of alarm. The man they had exiled was back, and he had done the impossible. Monarchs who had once raised glasses to toast his downfall now scrambled to reform the coalition. Napoleon understood the stakes. His enemies were already mobilizing. Wellington in the west, Blücher in the east. France, still weary from years of war, was fractured. Many supported his return, but others feared it would mean more bloodshed. Napoleon's plan was clear: strike first, strike fast. Before the Allies could unite, he would march into Belgium and divide their forces. Victory there might force the coalition to reconsider peace. But this was no longer the world of 1805. Napoleon's enemies had studied his methods. They were ready. And in the green fields of Belgium, everything would come to a head at Waterloo. Shall I continue with the final chapter? The Battle of Waterloo, where empires fall, June 18, 1815. The fields near the small Belgian village of Waterloo stood silent beneath a gray sky. But that silence would not last. Napoleon faced off against two great armies, the Anglo-Allied forces under the Duke of Wellington and the Prussian army under Gebhard Leberecht von Blücher. If he could defeat them separately, he might still salvage his empire. That morning, the emperor stood confident. His strategy was familiar: strike the British first, hold them down, and crush them before the Prussians could arrive. But rain had soaked the ground, delaying his attack. Time, the one thing he didn't have, was already slipping away. The French launched assault after assault. La Haye Saint-Hugomont, names that would be etched in blood. Cannon fire shook the earth. Cavalry thundered across muddy fields. The Imperial Guard, the elite, was unleashed in a final gamble. But Wellington held firm. And then, late in the day, Blücher arrived. The Prussians smashed into Napoleon's flank. His line crumbled. His army broke. For the first time ever, the words echoed across the battlefield. La garde recule. The guard is retreating. The legend was shattered. The dream was over. Waterloo was not just a battle, it was the full stop at the end of an empire. Epilogue. The ashes of empire. After Waterloo, Napoleon fled back to Paris. The illusion of power was gone. Even his most loyal supporters knew. it was over. On June 22, 1815, just 4 days after his defeat, Napoleon abdicated for the second time. He hoped to escape to America, but the British Navy had him surrounded. With no options left, he surrendered to Captain Frederick Maitland aboard the HMS Bellerophon. But Britain had no intention of allowing another exile like Elba. They sent him far away, across the world to the island of St. Helena, a remote volcanic rock in the South Atlantic. There, guarded and isolated, the man who once crowned himself emperor would live out his final years. For 6 years he lingered, writing memoirs, walking the cliffs, staring out at the endless sea. On May 5, 1821, Napoleon Bonaparte died. He was 51. Some said it was stomach cancer, others whispered of poison. Whatever the cause, the final chapter had been written. Yet, even in death, his legend only grew. Across Europe and beyond, he remained a symbol of ambition, of genius, of tyranny. And history would never forget the 100 days when a single man dared to defy the world.